Hello, everyone. I want to welcome you all to today's webinar, Transforming Higher Ed Event Data into Actionable Insights, where we're going to spend some time today discussing leveraging data to help expand your event impact. I'm happy to introduce myself. I'm Will Connect. I'm Senior Director of Higher Education Sales at Cvent, and we have a great webinar planned for you all today, where we're going to spend a little bit of time taking a deeper dive, if you will, into the metrics that help drive success and how these metrics can effectively be applied to enhance your event planning and strategic execution. We're going to go over just a few housekeeping items before we rock and roll. I'd like to draw your attention to the right side of your screen. We welcome everyone in attendance today to engage with the entire audience via chat. You can submit any and all questions via our live Q&A. And for those that are in attendance today that are interested in downloading today's presentation or any additional content, if you will, please click on resources to the right. So we are going to jump into the agenda and what our goals look like today. But before we do that, I would love to really introduce my colleagues here and have them come up, both Jordan and Jared, to share a little bit about their background here at Cvent.
Thanks, Will. Hi, I'm Jordan Clark, Senior Manager of Event Program Design here at Cvent, where I help clients just like you maximize their total event program.
And I'm Jared Rupert. I'm the Director of Digital Analytics here at Cvent, and I partner closely with our event planners and marketers to really dive into their event program insights.
All right, thanks, team. So let's focus on really what outcomes and goals we're looking for today. So in the next half hour, we're going to spend a little bit of time discussing the framework we've developed here at Cvent and how you can leverage your data. Now, I want to point out that today's discussion is a little bit more than just data collection. It really is a focus, if you will, on equipping you with the tools and knowledge to transform your data into actionable insights. And not only to drive the success of your overall events and your event program, but really to give you the tools as well to personally leverage all of your data to increase your ability to influence outcomes within your institution. So the first goal really is to really talk you through how to tackle the data challenge and to decipher all the white noise around it to really develop actionable insights. Next, we'll spend a few minutes diving deep into how to simplify really the seemingly overwhelming sea of data points and discuss how to leverage this framework for your institution. And of course, last but not least, we'll highlight how you can personally leverage all the insights and the tools that we discussed today to both strengthen your events as well as your ability to tell your event story in a much more powerful, influential, and data-supported way. So with that, I'm really happy to bounce it over to Jordan to get us going.
Perfect. All right, y'all. One of the biggest challenges that we have with data is how to actually make it impactful, how to take it from being an overwhelmingly sea of numbers, metrics, and insight into something that's actionable. Now, the big question is, how do we make that make sense? The transformation of data is actually a really interesting one, if you think about it. We went from a world where gathering data surrounding the impact of an event was really actually kind of hard to capture. We maybe knew who registered, who came to the event, but beyond a feedback survey, it was likely hard to track and quantify any real impact of your event. Beyond the basics, many interactions weren't trackable. Now, that's where, as we move forward, fast forward to today, we find ourselves in a world where everything is trackable and measurable. So the opposite end of the spectrum. Every interaction, every click, every engagement in our personal lives, at school, at work, and what's most relevant to today's discussion, at events. Today, events can generate mountains and mountains of data, from attendee engagement to satisfaction to brand awareness. We went from that limited data set that we talked about to an overwhelming amount of data that presents a different challenge. The challenge is how to find what's actionable versus that white noise that Will just referenced in the data. First, you'll need to segment the data from that undecipherable amount of numbers into a segmented data set. Take out what's white noise and focus on the data that supports the story or the outcome that you're working towards. But even segmenting the data isn't going to be enough. To fully maximize your data, you have to make it actionable. You have to make it visualizable. Now, I will say that step process that I just went through, that was an oversimplification of how to look at data. But I wanted to start with this as we dive further into the framework that we've created to help you take your data and transform it into actionable insights. Now, as we proceed forward, I do want to pause a moment and dive into why this matters so much. Being able to leverage data really does tell a story, and that's what we're going to paint today, is that story. It helps you make decisions such as what constituents would be the target audience for an event, or what communications may yield the best results. We have now, Will, you and I, we've worked together at Cvent within the higher ed vertical for years. I'm going to have you take this next part and really share your take on why data and metrics matter so much, specifically to this vertical.
Yeah, happy to, Jordan. So when we answer why, it's really because engagement matters. Events are, no question, a top driver of overall engagement. And if we want to successfully engage all of our constituents, so we think of our students, our alum, donors, and others, it's a must that we deliver amazingly good events. Did you know that 77% of students who spend just an hour at a campus program or event report higher satisfaction with their college or university? And it doesn't stop there. The more students engage, the higher that satisfaction continues to grow. And just as impactful is that involved students are 3 times more likely to be considered for a job post-graduation. So these stats are critical as we consider all the key goals like retention, degree completion, and graduate employment rates. I want to talk for a second about alumni and donors because the story there is pretty similar. 85% of all fundraising comes from just a few through major gifts and planned giving. And then 77% of alumni relation teams measure success largely by the overall dollars that are raised. But there's a challenge. 72% of alumni report experiencing solicitation fatigue. And I'm sure many of us on today's presentation have probably been there before. So while we're working to build closer connections and increase overall alumni engagement, it's critical that we be mindful of how often we're reaching out to all of our constituents and followers. And this is why events are so crucial. They allow us to focus on key groups, all of our students, again, our alum, our major donors, in ways that are fun, that help build community and engage without being overwhelming.
Will is right. The amount of institutions that Cvent works with that create actionable insights is an area that we really do see pretty common. Within higher ed and this vertical, I will say we can have some of the most meaningful results when we're able to help visualize the story with the data. Now, just like Will just did when sharing the statistics around student, alumni, and donor engagement, that data ultimately had to be collected, organized, and actioned in a meaningful way. Now, this is where that framework that I've been promising you comes in. Now, one more pause before I dive into it. I want to go ahead and level set a few definitions that are going to be key to understand as we move forward. First, a metric. This is going to be that quantifiable data point that tells you something specific, but is oftentimes not enough on its own to action. The second definition is a key performance indicator, or a KPI. This combines those metrics to provide insights into the performance that matters to your business goals. A metric is a data point. A KPI is that outcome that you are trying to drive towards. Together, they support each other, but independent of each other, they're not easily actionable. We have to connect them together in order to visualize the bigger picture. All right, now for what I've been promising, the framework. This leads me to the start of that framework and how I want you to start thinking through all of the data that you have access to. The hardest part about understanding your data is actually being able to take a single metric and identify what it means, who cares about it, and ultimately when you can use it. Every metric is carefully chosen to reflect your institution's goals and your stakeholders' expectations. When you do this, you'll be able to see patterns that help activate, report, and use data faster and smarter, leveraging the 3 components that you see here. You'll have that clear path from data collection to insight generation, but it's not just about amassing large amounts of metrics that lead, because ultimately that is going to lead to that white noise in data that I've been referencing. It's about making the data work for you, for the outcomes that you're trying to drive towards. Now, this is where we see objective themes in the what, stakeholder categories and for the who, and ultimately maturity stages for the when. Starting with objective themes, this, like I said, is the what. What is the end stage that you are working towards? What's that outcome that you're trying to drive towards? What is the goal of your event? Each one of these objective themes highlighted here is aligned to aspects of event success that we commonly see, such as engagement, financial results, and maybe communication engagement. By categorizing metrics in this way, we ultimately are going to be able to ensure that every piece of data has a design purpose and contributes in a meaningful and ultimately a meaningful way, and ultimately impacts your event in the way that you're trying to. Now, with a clear understanding of what each metric accomplishes, your decisions are more informed and directly tied to the strategic outcomes that you're driving towards. Next, stakeholder categories. These align to your outcomes to ensure that insights provided are directly relevant to teams within your organization that have an investment in your event success. These are going to be your stakeholders. While high-level institution goals may be aligned, each of these stakeholders will likely have unique objectives based on their role within the institution, requiring you to consider different metrics and KPIs aligning to each stakeholder. Now, let's take an example here. For example, when dealing with maybe an event manager, you might be looking at registration and attendee conversion year over year to determine actionable target invitation, registration numbers, and how to estimate per person cost more accurately. But in that same event, what you may see is alumni relations on the other hand. They may look at those same KPIs to donor engagement. Aligning metrics with stakeholder needs ensures that everyone from the ground up is equipped with the right information, fostering collaboration and leading to efficiency and ultimately results. Now, this leads me to our third, maturity stages. This is the when. Now, I will be palms up. I'm not the biggest fan of the term maturity stages and maturity models, because it really does sometimes allude to either undersimplifying or over-complexing data frameworks. But it is a good way to showcase when to guide the adoption and evolution of the data intelligence based on what phase your organization is in its data development. Foundational is when you're going to have segmented data that you are manually bringing together. As we move to intermediate, you're likely looking at metrics that you have confidence in but need to deeply analyze for the right outcomes. Advanced models, now these are going to be more interconnected metrics and to turn them into actionable KPIs that require consistency. Really, and this is that last one, going to be at that program level. Understanding where you're at in your maturity model is going to allow you to focus your attention for when it evolves in a controlled, effective manner, ensuring your institution remains agile and informed as it grows. Now, let me pause. I've just said a whole lot of words, and looking at these metrics and KPIs are incredibly powerful. But even more powerful, and what I've alluded to, is painting that story with data. Now, this is Jared's superpower, and I'm going to pass it over to Jared to start showing how you can identify the right data to tell your event's story and how you can then turn that into action. Jared, over to you.
Thanks, Jordan. So understanding your data isn't just about collecting numbers. It's about aligning data to your goals and understanding data relationships, uncovering patterns and opportunities, and developing a data-driven strategy to really move the program forward. So this is the core of that Cvent framework that we're creating. So in this next slide, I'll show you an example of just an example of some event metrics. So one moment, we're waiting for this next slide. Apologies. So these are all just some examples of event metrics, but how can we use them to support our program goals? The first step is going to be data visualization, or excuse me, data organization. So this will include sorting, categorizing, and filtering for metrics that support your goals. So when it comes to data organization, we want to understand what data is available to us. We want to understand the primary KPI for your goal, and we want to leverage supporting data needed to reach that goal. So in this next example, we're going to use an example for the next few slides. So let's say, for example, our goal is to grow total event registrations. First, we want to identify the primary metric that supports that goal. So here you can see highlighted, our primary KPI will be event registrations. So we'll want to dig into this KPI to further understand it. We want to understand, so let's get started. So to understand event registration KPI, we want to analyze historical performance. That way we can gain perspective, set benchmarks, and create our goals. So here we're looking at in-person and virtual registration data in the weeks leading up to our event. So we have 3 goals in our data analysis. We want to understand what happened, why did it happen, and what should we do next. So this data is helpful, but could we make it easier to understand? So simple but effective data visualization, right? This is that same data from the prior slide, just visualized. So data visualization can help highlight patterns and trends, making it easy to identify and communicate what's happening. So for this event, we can now see that in-person event registration peaks about 5 weeks out, and virtual registrations peaks around 1 week prior to our event. So now this is interesting, right? But why did it happen? How do we make it actionable? Oftentimes, understanding that why requires looking at your supporting data. So what is supporting data? Supporting data will be any metrics that help impact your primary KPI success. So as a reminder, our primary KPI is event registrations in the gold. We're going to want to ask ourselves, well, what other metrics can help support the success of this goal? When it comes to event registrations, some supporting data could be marketing metrics like campaign performance, or peak registration times, or maybe audience demographics with high conversion rates. Identifying supporting data can also help drive collaboration around your organization by identifying which teams to work with to paint that full picture. So now that we've identified our primary KPI and our supporting data, we want to understand data relationships. So ask yourselves, how do these metrics impact each other? How do they impact my goal? For example, the number of emails sent may impact the number of registrations driven from email, which could then impact total registrations. Understanding data relationships gives us the capability to analyze each step of the registration flow and uncover optimization opportunities. So by using a data framework, you can better understand your data with data relationships, data maturity, and data categorizations.
Now, one thing that I think is really important to point out is that not all event data is in one place. So it's so important that we connect different sources to get a much broader and full picture of all of our data. Data to measure event programs can be found throughout your entire institution. Think about maybe your CRM solution or your marketing automation platform, different business intelligence tools, and more. By ensuring that our event data is integrated across platforms, there are a few things that we can do. We can fully understand the entire event program, and of course, its overall impact across our entire institution. So not all data that you have access to will be in one spot. So the more that you can connect all of that data sources And the more comprehensive view that you have, you'll be able to then cite and dig in deeper to some of your event program's trends and the overall impact as well. And look, again, it's incredibly insightful, and it's tremendously impactful as well. The more data that you have under one roof, the more power you have to then use that data. So going back to the framework that Jordan was just spending a little bit of time on, covering the objective themes, the stakeholder categories, and the maturity stages. So not only in our framework, though, are we building the what, who, and when you look at the data, but we're also building in guidance to the where you can access all of this additional data as well. And back over to Jared.
Thanks, Will. So as a reminder now, so far in our example, we've organized our data, we've uncovered patterns and understood relationships. We've pulled the data out to understand historical performance, and we visualized it so we can better visualize and communicate what's happening. So as Will had said, now we want to use this data in our analysis. So something Will just talked about was how powerful it is to connect your systems into your event program data. And that's because connecting your systems gives your data more depth. So we're returning to our previous goal, right? Driving event registrations. And here we're returning to our visualization where we're looking at in-person registrations by week leading up to the event. So what happened? In-person registrations peaked 5 weeks prior to our event. But how can we understand why? Let's try layering in supporting data from other systems. I'm going to try alumni class data. Now we're looking at in-person registrations by week by graduating class. So by connecting these systems and adding supporting data, you can gain additional perspective into driving your goal. This really helps uncover that why in your data analysis. So now we can see which alumni classes drove the most event registrations. We can see in the green there, the 90s class, and in the purple, the 2000s class, were the most registrations driven about 5 weeks prior. So a lot of context and insight here from connecting our systems. We're still left with now what, which might require a little bit more digging. Let's take action here. And what do we mean by this? So taking action on your analysis can really help you evolve into a consultative and data-driven event strategist. So as a reminder from our previous example, layering in data will uncover opportunities to dive deeper in your analysis. So basically more data will lead to more questions, but the answers are worth it. So we know now, right, that the 90s and 2000 classes drove the highest registration volume for our event 5 weeks prior. Let's dig further into the audiences for more context. So maybe for the 1990s class, we'll want to understand, well, which types of events or marketing channels drove registrations with this group? Which locations had the best attendance rates, or which audiences were most receptive to our messaging? And for our 2000s class, which marketing channels were most effective at driving registration rates, or what content types were resonating with this audience? So digging into supporting data can really help you uncover successful strategies for your event program. And so once we have all of that context, we're going to know the recipe for success for our primary KPI. We'll know which classes, which cities, what timing, what messaging have been successful in the past. That allows us to become strategic and consultative in developing our go-forward plan and to really drive event registrations. So we might find that this alumni group responds very well to our email marketing campaign 4 to 8 weeks out from our event. And then this is something that you can bring to your stakeholders and drive strategic decisions that really make an impact on your event program.
All right. Like I promised y'all, this is Jared's superpower. Taking that overwhelmingly sea of data points and visualizing it in a meaningful way, and being able to make recommendations accordingly. Now, each one of you is on this webinar because in some way you are interested in leveraging data in more of a meaningful way. Now, maybe you're an event planner starting out in higher ed events and want to learn how to action those post-event surveys better that I referenced earlier and those data points. Or maybe you're the head of alumni relations and want to use data to gain insights for your college or university's administration about the impact of events to the institution's bottom line as you report findings up to the chancellor. Increasing your impact is about activating and understanding the data to improve each step of the event execution and the process. Now, y'all, I'm not going to go on another long rant and say a lot of words, but I do want to talk a little bit about this slide before I bring Jared and his superpower up one more time. Finding the impact at an event level will consider the individual parts of your event, the individual milestones of the event. Now, Jared's walked us through an example of how we can use that data for this to help with things like event registration and engagement and knowing when your event registrations peak by type. But you can take that mindset into other portions of your event execution, like driving more engagement with your content, ultimately increasing that sphere of influence that you have within your own institution utilizing data. But as I promised, I'm not going to keep talking. I'm going to turn it over to Jared to talk about how to take it from an event level to a program level.
Thanks, Jordan. So I'm going to show you this concept as an overview, and then we'll dive deeper into each example. So as a reminder, we just looked at one event. We want to know how the timing and which alumni classes, how that interacted with one event, right? But your analysis could really change depending on what you're looking to analyze. So maybe for one single event, you might want to dive in, such as a commencement. You might want to dive in very deep to understand which messages and channels are working. You might want to back up, right, and analyze your event program. Maybe you want to understand which types of events are driving the impact for your goals. And lastly, this is the most important in my opinion, ensuring that your event program is represented at your organization level, right? You really want to make sure you're represented and driving the results of your event program in those conversations for your entire organization. So for the first example, right, one single event, you might want to dig into things such as what regions are driving event registrations, or again, which marketing channels, which audiences. This is very granular, where you might want to understand which pages, which content types, which videos are driving the success for your one event. And then we might want to take a step back, right? We might want to evaluate and optimize your event program. So here we could look at, well, which event types have the highest donation rates, or which event types do we collect most revenue per event on? Where should we focus our efforts, right? And this might help us understand, well, look, our workshops aren't very effective at driving our donations, but if we're looking to drive donations, we see that commencements and webinars are effective here. So by analyzing your event program, you can really kind of optimize and tinker to get to your event program goals. And lastly, as I've mentioned, right, there's discussions that your organization and university are having for their goals. So maybe for the university, they have a goal to drive donations by marketing tactics, and they might be working with different groups, such as partnerships or public relations or press releases, recruiting. It's really important that you have a seat at that table to ensure that you are representing how you are contributing to that event KPI, that KPI that your university has.
All right. How many of you are officially data experts by now? Okay, that was a lot, I know. But I'm hoping that you're leaving a little less overwhelmed than when you first sat down today. And that was ultimately the goal of the framework that we built, to guide you in learning how to process and comprehend your event data. So as we progress to the next slide, I want to go through that framework one more time. This is meant to help you identify what your data means, who cares about your data, when it can be utilized, and ultimately where it could be found. Now, that's going to leave us with the big question of how. I'm going to transition it back over to Will to close this out.
Yeah, absolutely, Jordan. Thank you. And that's it. How you can leverage these components to identify practical and significant KPIs. Integrating data from different sources. We talked about that earlier and how critical that is to tell a better story, a more comprehensive story for your key constituents and stakeholders. to gain, again, that more comprehensive view that ensures your event story is organized and insightful. And then, of course, allowing you to make informed, I would say better informed decisions that drive your events and your event programs forward. And how you can establish a solid foundation for growth and, of course, impact for your event, your program, your institution, and let's not forget yourself as well. So with that, I do want to thank you all for joining us today. I hope you found this insightful. And one thing I did want to point out, we are running a great program right now. If you look down on your screen, I want to highlight the fact that if there's additional interest and you'd like to have an additional conversation with our team, please feel free to connect with us directly. We'll be happy to schedule a more formal conversation to understand your programs, your data concerns, your data requirements. And we'd like to also provide you with a gift card from Amazon as well for your time. So just wanted to throw that out there. We'd love to have a productive conversation with you post this program as well. And what we'd like to do is address the live Q&A now. I think we had some questions that came through. So my colleagues and I would like to spend maybe a few minutes to address some of those questions. So let me take a stab here. We have one question that came through that I'd like to welcome Jordan and Jared, and I'm happy to chime as well. But what do you do if you don't have access to the data? Jordan, Jared, you all want to take a stab at that one? I'm happy to piggyback too.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, Jared, I'm going to have you start. I have some thoughts as well.
Sure. Yeah. So if you don't have access to the data, that might just be that you don't have access to the data today. So I think it's important to talk to your organization, find out where this data lives. Will had talked about different systems that this event data lives in, right? So I think it's important to go across the aisle and speak to different teams to say, hey, here are my needs. What data might you have to help me get there? So partnering, like we partner with our event team often. I'm on the analytics side of the house, their event planners, and I'm finding out the context and their goals, and I'm saying I have these data points that might support that. So get to talking. You might find that there is data that's over there. It's just not quite, you guys haven't quite connected yet.
Yeah, something that as we were putting together this content that Jared and I spoke heavily about is that not all data is going to be necessarily in one spot. And that's, Will talked about that and the need to bring the data sources together into kind of that data powerhouse. Now, the challenge with that is sometimes that's just data points and that's that sea of white noise. So you have to make sure that it's actionable, that you're connecting it in the right way. Just like Jared said, though, it's about making connections internally about where that data could possibly live. Now, I will also say that there are times where that data may not exist, and you have to go off of more of that qualitative information versus quantitative information. So more of that, how did that event feel? Did you get a positive influence from your attendees? But the big thing is then to make sure that you do implement a strategy to capture that data in the subsequent years and the subsequent events so that that can support at a program level. So the big thing is, number one, try to reach out to other departments, other systems that may be able to support capturing that data that you actually may have access to. You just have to gather it. If not, then the second piece of it and the bigger piece of it is make sure to institute a strategy in order to capture that data.
Yeah, Jordan, I think you and Jared did a great job there highlighting that. And I think this next question, I think this blends really nicely into this next question. I'll take a first stab at it. How do I get started trying to find all of these data points? So, that's something we hear a lot out in the field in general. And the one thing I always comment on is, I think the first part is, one, what data is critical for your business and your institution? What data matters most? Have you been tasked with collecting certain data items and key KPIs like Jordan talked about earlier? And then I think it's really important to understand who the other stakeholders are that are responsible for collecting that data. That might be cross departments, that might include colleagues within your individual team as well. So I think number one would be outlining and defining what the key data elements are, and then better understanding across the board and across departments who's responsible for collecting some of that data. And then going back to kind of the data collaboration and data integration, once you identify key stakeholders and the data points, then you can better understand, well, what systems do we have in play today to capture that data, or what systems may we need to invest in to capture all of that data? I would start there. Jordan, Jared, any additional comments?
Yeah, I will say that, and you're spot on, Will, is it's asking yourself, what am I going to use this data for? And making sure that you have that cross-functional outreach. Now, I think that one of the biggest challenges that I see is we see institutions go from one extreme to another, where again, it goes back into that white noise of data. I think that one of the biggest challenges that we've come across multiple times is making sure that you've identified all the stakeholders of your event. So we highlighted some of the common ones, whether it's the event team, whether it's alumni relations, etc. But then the audience members, the attendees, they're going to be their own stakeholder in this. So looking at it from a stakeholder perspective and saying, okay, what are the data points that each one of them needs, and relating it up. Our own annual conference, I can tell you that the data point that Will needs in sales is going to be very different than our marketing team is going to need. And our analytics team takes all of those and compiles it together. So looking at it at a stakeholder level and drilling down into, okay, what's the supporting data that each one of them needs?
Yeah, absolutely. Keep rolling on here. Here's a good question that came through, Jordan, that maybe you can help address. I'm going to display it for everyone right now. What does maturity mean? Is it the data, or in my experience?
Yeah, and this is why, palms up, I'm not the biggest fan of the term maturity model for this very reason, is because of the confusion that it can elicit. It is about, in our framework, the maturity of your data set. So again, just because you have data doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be actionable. So when we talk about foundational versus intermediate versus advanced, foundational is going to be that limited data sources that you are trying, and data sets that you're trying to pull together. Intermediate is, okay, I've started pulling them together, but how am I actioning it? Advanced is really going to be more along the lines of, we have BI dashboards that are pulling all of this together so we can see real-time insights across our CRM, our marketing and automation platform, and our event registration platform, pulling all of that data together in a more advanced way so that we're saying, yes, the data is accurate, the data is consistent across all of these platforms together. So palms up, that's why I struggle with that exact term, but it's not about experience, because this is going to be kind of my inspirational side coming out. But I will say throughout my career, the biggest thing that I've been able to leverage is actually the more access that I get to data, the more I'm able to make educated decisions in a meaningful way. And so on a personal and career level, the more that you can action data, and it does not matter if you're just starting out in the industry or you've been in the industry for 20 years, the more that you can take this framework and put it in place, the more that you're going to see impact. All right, that was my inspiration moment for this webinar, Will.
No, that was great, Jordan. Look, I would add one fine point too, is, we learn so much from the institutions in the higher ed community that we work with. And, regardless of where you may be or where you think you may be in the maturity stage that Jordan was just highlighting, you're not alone. That's the big thing. You're not alone. There are so many peers of yours that are in a very similar situation. And, we'd love to have those conversations with you. We learn best practices from you and your peers. So if you feel overwhelmed, that's okay. We see that out in the field today with many of your peers at other institutions and other schools. So that's why we'd love to talk to you on the side to maybe help you identify some of those key KPIs and those metrics, not only to make better sense of it all, but how do we manage it maybe a little more effectively? how do we, not only track it, but how do we have it play nicely with some other data sources and stuff that we talked about earlier before. So we know there's a lot of challenges there. We're happy to provide whatever support we can to guide you down the right path, even if you're just getting started. I think that was it for the questions that were submitted, but we're happy to stay on another minute or two if there's more that pop in.
Yeah, Will, one just came in from Eric Spence, it looks like.
Oh, there we go. Let me display this. Thank you. Okay, so thank you, Eric, for the great question here, and I'll read it to the crowd. In respect to the why, how much attention should be given to external factors that will affect the internal data we can collect, such as economic factors, attendee scheduling conflicts, etc.? Jordan, Jared, I'll pass it over to you to take a quick stab at this one.
Yeah, Jared, do you have initial thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I have two thoughts on why. So why is that qualitative data, right? We work very closely with our UX team to get that type of qualitative data where we understand maybe the context and more just like written feedback about what might be occurring, and it really helps validate or explain some of the data points you're seeing. On the other side, these, in my opinion, these data readouts are also intended to spur discussion, right? So you might see that something is down. That's when the room can have a discussion about why, saying, hey, I've talked to some of our clients and they've said that they have conflicts or they can't relate, it's not in their budget this year. So the idea of the data readouts should be conversational, and that's where you can also discuss the whys and get that context from other teams to figure out what might be occurring there. So you don't have to know everything going into your discussion. You might just say, here's some things that might be occurring.
Yeah, and I actually had somebody, let me restart that entire sentence. Will, Jared, and I, we've worked together for years. And Will and I specifically within the higher ed vertical here at Cvent. I actually had an institution that I was working with just recently reach out, and they had done an event year over year, but they were really struggling with reporting and their outcome. And as I asked about who their stakeholders were, and they listed their C-levels, their head of departments, and their stakeholders. But as we drilled down into the data that they had access to, that's where they realized that they needed to go ahead and make sure that they had the data points built in order to action in subsequent years. But when I challenged them, I said, look at the trends year over year. You've been doing this event for 7 years. You do have insight into many things, such as the cost to put on the event, broken down by budget line item as an example. Look at the trend of cost versus savings as an example of venue space or food and beverage or whatever it may be, cost per attendee. And I said that because as we've seen the economic trends over within, in this example, the 7 years, that's where we saw some insights that they were able to bring forward to justify why the budget year over year has changed, but why they also needed to look at their ticket prices as an example in this particular use case. So I absolutely do think that, to Jared's exact point, they're talking points as you do see the trends and the analysis in order to understand why something may have changed.
Okay. I think that might be it, everyone. I know we're at the 45-minute mark. I'm just doing one last perusal to see if there are any final or remaining questions. And I think that's it, everyone. Well, look, I do want to thank everyone again for your time today. Really enjoyed having an opportunity to be part of this panel. I hope you found it insightful, and we will look forward to speaking with you hopefully soon. So please reach out to us at your convenience. We'll be happy to give you some more guidance. Thank you, everyone.